So I I guess my overwhelming sentiment is just there's more work to do.
Yeah.
And plus this stuff is wildly expensive
Mhm.
compared to, and let me get a little bit to the punchline because eventually with my dad, he was not able to stay at home. Um, that was what he wanted. We tried, but the complexity was overwhelming. These experiences caring for our loved ones when they're coming to the end of life. Um, you know, I was my dad's caregiver
Yeah.
when he got an unexpected cancer diagnosis, and what I learned as that, and great, he had great medical care, great nursing care. I was the coordinator, but I was trying to manage and to help them stay in. My parents stay at home together, and my focus now is really on finding innovators, the innovators of today, in making it possible for people to get what they want.
So the first part of the book is the early years. Can you talk about that part for a second?
Well, I think the summary is, um, my dad was born in 1931.
Yeah.
So right as the Depression was really, really, really underway. His dad, both his parents were first generation in the city, in from the countryside,
Mhm.
not very far from the city.
Mhm.
But his dad was a laborer.
Mhm.
Or just he could fix anything, he could do anything with his hands, but he was a general laborer, and he didn't work in the Depression steadily at all until World War II.
Did you know there's a technology that's actually an app on your phone that uses sound waves to tell your brain what you want your brain to do? We had a young man that was on a guest on our podcast, the Mike Litton Experience, who had a traumatic brain injury. He was sleeping 3 hours a night. He's using NewCalm now and he's sleeping more. Go to newcalm.com, Mike15 promo code. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. Mike is passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
David Jones Jr., thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. We're going to start with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, and we're going to go up to today. You were kind enough to edit your dad's book, David Jones Sr., right? His book. Okay.
Yep.
And I love this book. Love it. And your dad is so inspirational. His story is incredible. And what we do here is tell stories, right? It's one of the things that I love the most about it. Like even the foreword starts out with he's standing on a lot, in Louisville, Kentucky, where his childhood home was. I mean, and you're in Louisville now, right?
I'm in Louisville now, yeah.
Thanks again for being here.
Hey, Mike, it's great to be with you. Thank you for asking me, and thanks for reading my dad's book. And
I love it.
I'm excited about talking to you.
The only thing I wish I'd have had a chance to meet him, because he sounds like a character, man. I mean,
well, and he never forgot a name or a face. I mean, that was part of his magic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think he's amazing. Okay. So where were you born?
I was born in New Haven, Connecticut.
Okay. Did you grow up there?
Nope. My dad was in law school at Yale Law School.
Uh-huh.
The final 3 of his 19 years of government paid education. He was there on the GI Bill after serving in the Navy. And my mom was teaching and supporting him on his way through, and I was the first of 5. But I was born and lived in New Haven until I was 2 when we came back to Louisville.
So you were in New Haven while he was going to law school, and then you came back to Louisville's where your dad's from. That's where he was born and raised. And
both my parents were from here. They met at the University of Louisville Dad was from sort of the wrong side of the tracks. My mom's father was a pharmacist and her mom a teacher, and they're both born in the Great Depression. So those distinctions were big, but it did not, it didn't impede a great romance and a wonderful partnership
That's
that I
awesome.
benefited from.
That's awesome. So you moved to Louisville when you're 2,
Yep.
and you grow up in Louisville.
Yep.
What was your favorite thing about growing up there?
Favorite thing about growing up in Louisville? Well, when you live in one place effectively your whole growing up period, it's hard to know what makes it different from anywhere else.
Mhm.
But I loved the Ohio River. Louisville is right on the Mason-Dixon line. It's the
Yeah.
northern part of Kentucky. The Ohio River, which is, part of the Mississippi, river drainage system, flows right by. And I spent a lot of time on a boat, swimming, water skiing, in the river. So I love that. I loved going to the University of Louisville basketball games, in particular. And I don't know. I mean, I think with hindsight, um, it's just not densely populated. It's not that big. It's enough of a city that we had a great theater, and there were a lot of things that influenced me. Really good roots music scene,
Mhm.
particularly bluegrass, was influential on me. Um, but it was accessible. It wasn't expensive, and I think that was it. But I was the oldest of 5. I mean, by the time when I was 13, my youngest sibling was born, and my mom would always sort of tease me, but also kind of poke me. In later years, she said, the main thing you said at, the dinner table when you were in high school and college was, this place is a zoo, because all the little kids were doing little kid stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've heard that Louisville has kind of a small town feel for being a pretty good sized city. Like the community is pretty tight from what I heard.
The community is pretty tight. I mean, it is, when we were talking before, you had a friend here. I was surprised that I didn't know him. But I think you and I are enough of a difference in generation that's probably the reason.
Yeah.
But it is it's a small enough town, that there is a lot of connectivity. In some ways, it's easy to get things done. It's also a comfortable enough place that complacency is a risk. We have, there is, I mean, it's not that expensive. That is that means there's less pressure to do things differently and innovate sometimes.
Yeah. So my family's originally from Kentucky.
Where?
Hardin County.
Hardin County. Oh man. Okay. Well, actually, my call just before there was talking about, basically children's health issues in Eastern Kentucky, which is still recovering from the bad floods of a couple years ago, and of course the opioid epidemic has just ravaged that. I mean, Appalachia in general, including the eastern part of Kentucky. So, wow, cool.
Yeah.
You managed to lose. You've lost your accent.
Yeah. So I was born in Oklahoma. And we moved from Oklahoma when I was 13 to California. Yeah. And so when I tell people that I'm from Oklahoma, they're not terribly surprised, because I don't have the accent I used to have. But there's still a little bit of a twang there, right?
There you go.
So I volunteered with a friend of mine who's a regular on our podcast, by the way. I interviewed him for our podcast a year ago or so. And it was, I think, his 3rd or 4th time on. And we finished the podcast. I said, so what do you have going on? And he said, well, tomorrow I'm going down to OB and this and that. OB is Ocean Beach. It's a community outside of San Diego or of San Diego. And I said, what are you doing in OB? He said, well, I'm going to go visit a bunch of businesses and see what the impact of the pier was destroyed not too long ago.
Right.
And the city hired him to do a report and part of it was a survey on the importance of investing $60 million in rebuilding the pier, right?
Yep.
So I volunteered to go do it because I was going to be an OB anyway. And I said, why don't I'll go do it. He goes, really? I said, yeah. He goes, that'd be great. So he's 80 something. So, I'm going to go schlep for him. Right.
Yeah.
So, and I love to walk, I try to walk 100 miles a month. So I go down there and I walk into one of the world famous burger places,
Yeah.
place called Hodad's, right?
Mm-hmm.
Walk into Hodad's, I walk over to the counter and or bar area. There's a gentleman there that looks like he's telling everybody what to do. Looks like the manager. So I walked up and I introduced myself. And I said, I'm doing a survey. Da, da, da. He goes, oh, I want to give you my feedback. So he gives me the feedback. I write it down. I said, I just need to validate this. I just need your first and last name. So I got his first name and then he told me his last name. And I said, your last name's Harden? And he said, yeah. I said, is it, right? And he spelled it for me. And I go,
Wow.
Well, where are you from? And he goes, Kentucky.
You tell him you're kin?
We're cousins, right? Of all the places and all the, right? Just crazy.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Know,
It's a tiny world.
It can be a
right?
small world. Yeah,
It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
So growing up, I think I know the answer to this, but growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
I think I would probably pick a teacher and a couple of coaches. It's hard to say which one, but I was a competitive swimmer up until I turned 16. So I, that kind of 2-a-days and, a lot of time in the pool was, again, with the benefit of hindsight, I look back and, that kind of tenacity building, endurance stuff was really important. I had a great football coach who was also a teacher, and I had really great language teachers, Latin, German, and I went on after I went to college. One of my big goals first goal was to get out of Louisville and go somewhere far away, but the second was to go see the world. And right out of college, I went and taught English in China for a couple of years. I learned Chinese in college. And my senior year of high school, I was an exchange student in Germany. And those experiences were encouraged by my parents, but I would give the teachers credit for catalyzing them. And then, my family was close-knit. I had all 4 of my grandparents were in Louisville alive. Both sets of grandparents were married to each other. And, every weekend we went to, see each pair of grandparents, and most of the cousins would be over there. So that was, I didn't know that was unusual or special in those days. But looking back, I realized that it was, and that family was a huge influence.
So what position did you play in football?
Well, so until senior year, I played guard on offense and tackle on defense. But eventually I grew enough and got further away from the swimming pool and got quicker. And I played tight end and linebacker.
Wow.
And that was super fun. The difference between standing up and being able to see what happened and down in a crouch and just hitting the person right in front of you
in the trenches,
is really the view from the trenches is much
limited.
much ballyhooed, but quite limited. I think that's right. Yeah.
You have to have, if you play line, you have to have a protective way about you, right? So I'm the voice, the announcer of my kids' former high school football team. And I have been for like 13 seasons. And I'm at church the other day. I'm in the men's room washing my hands. And I hear, hey, aren't you that announcer guy? Or no, he goes, hey, aren't you the announcer? And I look up.
And you're like, uh-oh, what did I do?
And I'm like, this kid was giant, right? And I'm like, yeah, right? And he said, I've been listening to you for 4 years. And you used to call my best friend. So he played 4 years in varsity, right? Big giant kid, right? On the line. And he blocked for his best friend who was a running back. And he said, you nicknamed my running back the one-man wrecking crew.
Yeah. But there were two.
This kid, this
Yeah.
kid, absolutely. I mean, if you ever watched a football player play that was carrying the ball, and it
Mhm.
didn't matter what position, right? But when they came up against a defender, this kid just ran through them like a Mack
Mhm.
truck. I mean, it was,
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
was one of the coolest. I'm not joking. One of the coolest things I've ever watched in my life,
Yeah.
and I couldn't help myself. You know, I'm not the most. Um, I'm not the most nonpartisan announcer in the world.
Yeah.
In fact, they brought me a 22-page guide on how to be
How to be less
less
inflammatory.
right. And I'm like, yeah, we'll get to that. Thanks. I haven't
Yeah.
read it yet, but it was like 6 years ago. Anyway,
Yeah.
so right. So anyway, so he told me, he said, you echo, your voice echoes in my mind, calling him the one man wrecking crew,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it was
I
wild.
got a lot. I got a lot out of playing football. I got to tell you, we don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but when the traumatic brain injury information came out about the NFL players, that really put me off the professional game
Really?
because it's like, well, I mean, um, the speed. I mean, just the physics, and it's the physics is really different
Yeah.
than at least at the level I played at in high
Yeah.
school. I mean, we just weren't that fast. We weren't that big. The collisions were, much less. I mean, it was like, ramming your car into a wall at 10 miles an hour instead of 50.
Right.
And
Big difference.
big difference, yeah. But yeah, anyway, but I think I had a happy growing up. I had enough I had a lot of candor with my parents and particularly well, and my grandparents. I had good relations with my grandparents, but you know, the um the sort of poverty and the impact of the depression on my dad's family was not something I learned about in history books.
Mhm.
I knew about that growing up. Um, my paternal grandmother lost one of her legs and she had a fall. She was diabetic and she had a fall and had to have the leg amputated. She broke her hip
Mm.
at, at a pretty young age in her 60s. And, so the loss of mobility and there were, my point is not, it's just, it was not, it wasn't perfect.
Mhm.
And my parents were, they made pretty clear that, that like staying married is a choice and, building a relationship is it's not, doesn't have to be a slog, but it's not just an automatic that if you love each other, you always get along and
Yeah.
you know how to compromise and meet each other in the middle or stand your ground and let the other person stand their ground and then compromise. All those like life lessons were um they weren't they were experienced rather than just heard about, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
The depression had a massive amount of ramifications on people.
It
I mean,
really
it
did.
just, the effect that it had was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was born in 1911, and I had an opportunity to farm with him for 9 years in Oklahoma.
Wow.
And he would share with me the things that took place. He was 18 years old when the Great Depression hit.
Yeah.
And he would share with me the things that happened on the ground that nobody ever talked about. Nobody,
Yeah.
people suffer in silence, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the suffering that took place was
Yeah.
just enormous, absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
And at the end of his life, he shared with me that he didn't take a lot of the risks that he felt like he should have taken. And one of the things that he implored me to do is go take risks, go take chances, go do things I didn't. You need to, you know.
Yeah.
And I still lived with that today. I mean, it's just, I literally use things every single day that my grandfather taught me. I mean,
Yeah.
just unbelievable. He was an amazing man.
No, it's fantastic. And you know, the experience, I'm guessing that, I mean, this is like Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
To me, I know the Dust Bowl
Yeah.
really through the music and the the literature of the period. I think it was different out there in that vast open farmland. It was rough in the river valleys. There were no jobs. The manufacturing shut down and everything, but but the farm still worked.
Mhm.
We didn't have that kind of drought and the utter loss of the food that you could figure out
Yeah.
how to to grow for yourself. Really interesting.
It was
Yeah.
amazing. It was
Yeah.
amazing to hear the stories of what they experienced,
Yeah.
what they went through, that kind of thing. I mean, it just boggled my mind.
Well, just to jump to my dad's book and the
Yes.
story a little bit, I think one of the things I think it comes out pretty well in the book, but he always, his willingness to take risk. I mean, he always pointed out that like he didn't have anything to lose.
Mhm.
I mean, he had nothing. They he and his partner, they each invest $1,000 in
Yeah.
their first nursing home, and he was not at all reckless. I mean, managing other people's money in a way that was honest and
Mhm.
respectful, and all there are all kinds of lessons about all that. But my mom was always, and her dad, my paternal grandfather, they were really worried about the amount of debt that my dad took on, because he had to guarantee every loan in those early days or whatever. And he would always just laugh and say, "What, like the the bank is the one at risk, not us.
Mhm.
What are we going to lose?"
Yeah.
I mean, and eventually there was an answer to that question,
And
right?
you get that, just so you know, this is the book that he's talking about.
Yeah,
And you get that from this book. You there's an absolute determination that your
yeah,
dad had that,
yeah,
let's be honest, most people don't have. And there's also this desire to care. Like they started with a nursing home, right? But they started with a nursing home because they were trying to care for people. They were trying to help.
yeah.
And I mean, there are so many people that get into business because there's a profit. They get into business
Mhm.
because they can make this. They can get into business. They get into business so that they can grow it and exit with, whatever IPO or sale or whatever. That's not your dad. Your dad and his partner were looking to care for people. They were looking to, for lack of a better term, to kind of love on people. And that's the thing that comes through in the book is
Well, I
how,
think, yeah.
yeah, just how absolutely pure his motivation was.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot to that. I don't, but I wouldn't, I wouldn't, it's not sugarcoating. I mean, my dad and his partner were both, no question, they were capitalists, and
Yeah,
but they were pragmatic. I mean,
yeah.
their view was capital. I mean, if you're going to be able to raise capital,
Mhm.
profit is not a an option. Profit
Right.
is a requirement in order to be able to continue to raise capital. And when you're building nursing homes and hospitals, these are capital intensive
Right.
things. Um, but they were heavily motivated. Each of them had a grandmother. And again, now we're going way back into
Yeah.
the 1930s.
Mhm.
But my dad's partner was from Horse Cave, Kentucky,
Mhm.
and his story is fascinating. And I'll come back to him in a moment about
Yeah.
how I came back to Louisville and got involved in some of this stuff. But each of them had a grandmother who, when she got old and was not able to be by herself, and in those days, if there was work to do, everybody in the family had to go out and do the work. I
Yeah.
mean, they had to go make whatever money they could. And so, there weren't nursing homes. A neighbor would take in the elders and sometimes tie their arms to the chair so they couldn't fall out. But there wasn't any care. There weren't
Yeah.
nurses, or it was custodial
Mhm.
only. And they just thought, hey, we could do better. And some of this is neither of them had been World War II people. They were Korea era military veterans, but neither had seen combat. Um, but they were in that generation. It's like, oh, anything that is being done can be done better,
Yeah.
because because we we invented all this stuff to win World War II. We
Mhm.
had invented, the atomic bomb. We invented all of this other stuff. And just that confidence that anything can be done better, including caring for each other,
Yeah.
was a huge driver
Yeah.
for both of them.
No, that's what you get when you read this book.
Yeah,
You get that spirit. Like you can feel it,
yeah,
right? It's in your dad's story. It's in his DNA. And yeah, I just think it's really cool because yeah, they got into business to be in business and they got into business to be capitalists and that kind of thing, but
yeah.
they were really filling a need.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that they saw, like you said, was there was no system. There was no like my grandmother was in a nursing home the last 4 years of her life.
Yeah,
And this was after 15 years prior, she had gone to a nursing home with my grandfather and I to see one of the neighbors that my grandmother was very close with. We walked out of the nursing home. She turned around and she never did this. She turned around. She said, "Both of you look at me. Don't you ever put me in one of these places."
yeah, 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 yeah,
And so when it came time, 15 years later, 20 years later, when it came time to make that decision, my aunt went to my grandfather and said, "We need to do this." And he said, "I can't. I have to talk to Mike." And we talked it out. He was killing himself, David. He was absolutely killing himself. I'm not joking. He was absolutely killing himself trying to take care of my grandmother.
yep,
And she had Alzheimer's and she didn't know his name. And she kept getting to a place where she needed more and more protracted care. And he wasn't he was a farmer. He was a rancher. He was an oil man, you know,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
He
yeah,
did his
yeah,
best. He did his
yep,
best. But he had a
yep.
bad back and he was having to lift her, right? So this man, no joke, was in the process of buying a crane that would lift her from the bed and put her in her chair.
Wow.
And that was sort of the breaking point. It was when everybody kind of went, "Wait a minute," right? And so that was when we had that conversation about, hey, she made us promise and we're going to break this promise. The thing I'm getting at is I know the value of what your dad and his partner created. And I know they did too, right? In
Yeah,
terms of the quality of life and taking good care of the people that you love. Um, and it was time, it was time. So I do come at this from a little bit different perspective, but uh,
well, and I know we're trying to kind of tell, my story chronologically, but I'll just put down a marker for, when we get to the what am I really focused on
yeah,
today, these experiences caring for our loved ones when they're coming to the end of life. Um, you know, I was my dad's caregiver
yeah,
when he got an unexpected cancer diagnosis, and what I learned as that, and great, he had great medical care, great nursing care. I was the coordinator, but I was trying to manage and to help them my parents stay at home together. And my focus now is really on finding the innovators of today, in making it possible for people to get what they want. And if you look at survey data, 80% of Americans will say, I want to die at home,
mhm,
and I do not want to be a financial burden to my family or burden them with excessive burden of caring for
yeah,
me. But, only 20% of people die at home. Most people die in institutions with complexity around them. And you know, um, there's just a lot of the way the complexity of the system makes that process still harder than it needs to be. Some of what your grandfather was struggling with, I'm sorry to say, is still with us.
yeah,
But the cost, and I won't preview the whole story. The cost of all of this
right,
today is just astronomical,
yeah,
getting people what they don't want.
yeah,
Um, So, but we can come back to that.
Yeah, and we will.
It's a, yeah, good.
Yeah, we will. My grandfather, my grandmother passed. My grandfather was 93, and I received a phone call from my aunt, the same aunt that was talking to me about putting my grandmother in the care facility. And she called and she said, "Your grandfather is going to pass in the next 48 hours. You need to get out of here."
Yeah.
And so I got on a plane the next morning, flew out there, and he was in a hospital, big hospital. They had life flighted him to this hospital because he had an obstructed colon, and they were making him comfortable. He was on a morphine drip, and they were giving him Ambien, and he wasn't sleeping like 30 minutes. So I got there and I walked on the floor, and the head nurse was at the nursing station, and she said, "You must be the grandson that they've been warning us about."
Uh-oh. What was the warning?
And I said, "That would be me." So I go into his room, and within about 10 minutes, I had her back in his room, and we had a conversation. And I would say less than 20 minutes later, he was asleep, and he had fallen asleep and slept for 8.5 hours. Hadn't slept more than 30 minutes at a time for 2 days.
Wow.
And so the head nurse comes to me and she says, "You should think about a career in healthcare, because you have an intuition about this that most people don't have." And I said, "Well, okay, but I'm him. Like, if you look at photos of him at my age, we're the same person, right?" Yeah. And I told her, I said, "I have his back, I have his knees. His knees were swollen and his back was killing him. Well, we got ice on his knees and ice on his back. I was putting the second ice pack on his right knee when he started snoring." Okay. So we were finishing up the ice thing, and he went to sleep. And so I said, "I really need to talk to the head resident." And so she brings him in, and he says, "You must be the grandson they've been warning me about." I said, "Yeah." So I said, "We need to walk. We need to take a walk." So we walked down the hall, and I said, "Grab his chart," right? So we walked down the hall, and I asked him, I said, "So what's going on? What's causing all this?" He said, "We don't know." It's okay. "Has a urologist looked at him?" "No." "Okay. Think that'd be a good idea?" "Yeah." So a urologist comes, looks at him. Turns out his prostate has swollen up, shut off his urethra. His bladder has backed up and pinched off his colon. So they shoot his prostate with some steroids. He's 93. Of course, his prostate, right? His prostate shrinks. His bladder gets relieved, and the obstructed colon goes away.
Wow.
Okay. He lives another 4 years, David, and they were expecting him to expire.
Wow.
They were done with him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, no, that's a real problem in this healthcare industry. Okay. And I love the fact that you're working on trying to help solve it. So
there's a lot in that story. And, part of it is there's no quarterback who knows,
just ask players. Just ask,
so,
right? All you have to do is ask. Like October 11th, a couple months ago, my life was saved.
What happened?
Literally. I went into the emergency room thinking that I had COVID and I was going to get a breathing treatment.
Yeah.
And they did a CT scan with contrast, and they found the largest clot they've ever removed from a human being in the history of the hospital. Wow. Hospital's been around over 100 years. Okay.
Wow.
And it's not every day that somebody says to you, "We found it, it's massive, and we're going to do everything we can to save your life tonight."
Wow.
And
that must have been a big surprise.
It was insane. It was insane. I thought I had COVID. I thought I was going in for a nebulizer, like a breathing treatment. And and I mean, unbelievable, right?
Well, we can move on from the healthcare system, but part of the balance is, these miracles happen every day.
Yeah.
Like you just described, where, you're in the right place and there's somebody there with incredible training, and there's somebody else there who knows how to do something really complicated, which is remove this clot. And, that's not something that was available to your grandfather.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And it's costly, and, you got, but we don't want to tear that down.
Yeah.
Right? We don't want to tear that down. We just
We
want to
want
make,
to, we want to help,
we
we
want to
want to
get,
boost. Yeah.
yeah, we want to improve building on the greatness.
Yeah.
And there's lots of, oh, now we can talk about AI, but let's not yet.
I love the way you think. Okay. So real quick, where did you go to
Yeah.
college?
I went to Yale.
Why did you
so
go to Yale? Because your dad went?
My dad went to the law school, and I was born up there,
Yeah.
and I had been to New Haven. There's a lot of connection, a lot of things, a lot of these early relationships in my
Yeah.
life have continued to be important today. But the kind of my second parents, if you will, were my mom and dad's best friends from the time that they were in New Haven in law school. And the second mom is still alive now, living down in North Carolina, and we're still very close. But so I had this kind of vibe that was good, but it wasn't just, I'm, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm seeing some change in what it says my speakers are here. Okay, but anyway, so it wasn't, and I graduated from high school in 76. There wasn't the same mania for which college you go to.
Yeah.
But so I applied to more than that. But it was a combination of that. And then two of my best friends from the class ahead of me in high school had gone there, very different people, one of, a young woman, one a young man. And so anyway, I had a lot of good vibes around about the place. And
That's awesome.
I had a good experience there.
I love that.
Yeah.
What was your major in college?
So let me take this off. I think, can you still hear me now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because you're coming out of my speakers now. I apologize. I must have kicked a wire.
Okay.
But I majored in history. And particularly strangely enough, I got infatuated with the kind of the impact of Puritan theology
Ooh.
on the settlement of the country through to the Constitution. And it wasn't that I aspired to or ever became a Puritan, but I was attracted, first of all, a great teacher in that period. That was the main reason. Somebody really captivated my imagination. But also the first generation of Americans to come to New England, they were just crazy utopians. I mean, they really thought they were going to build a better world and set an example that the rest of the world would copy, that whole city on a hill kind of idea. And they were, they were dead serious about it, how they structured their society. And
Sure were.
so they were, to me, I think, a lot of this like innovation has always been of interest to me. These were serious social innovators, and they were, they were, one of the famous preachers of that day. I think it was Increase Mather, the father of Cotton Mather. He was the first American leader to persuade a city to inoculate itself against smallpox. And this was back in like 1685 or something like that, right when the British discovered from like, and I can't remember the history, but it had to do with, on dairy farms, the people who spent a lot of time around their cows, the cows never got smallpox. And that's where the vaccine came from. Anyway, but it's like these were, they weren't crazy people. They were people who were very passionate about building something new. And that first generation, really, really got a lot of reinforcement from the fact that they survived the winters and all that stuff. Anyway, that's a real detour. Now you're
No, it was cool.
What a nut. But it was
really cool.
And and then from there I went to China to teach English because I wanted to go see the world. As I mentioned, I had taken 2 years of Chinese as an undergrad. It was hard to get started because the classes met 5 days a week from 8:30 to 10:30. And that, first of all, it was earlier than the other classes. And second, it wiped out a whole swath of other courses that you could take. You know, but and I was in China from 1980 to 82, and then spent most of the 80s trying to find a different way of working with China. Ultimately, I went back to law school, and then I went to work for the State Department as a lawyer, working on largely on East Asia things like the treaty to end the Cambodia Civil War, the Khmer Rouge, and the kind of murderous rampage they went on, the normalization of relations with Vietnam, Hong Kong's sort of return from the British colonial rule to Chinese rule, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I was, both of our children were born when we were living in Washington, and I had a great job offer from my client, the East Asia Bureau at the State Department, to go out to Singapore and be the first executive director of a new international organization that was to be based there. When my dad's co-founder at Humana died suddenly of a brain tumor. And suddenly, it had been, and the book tells the story, but it had been really a partnership between the two of them. They were really great complementary leaders. There's all kinds of models of two very different people working together. But, suddenly 2 members of the company's board visited me in Washington and took me to lunch and said, "We think you should get involved somehow. We don't know how, but like, your dad's all alone. Company's not doing very well at that time." And the thing I didn't figure out until later was my dad had a very strong personality, and the complementarity between the two partners, they strengthened each other's strengths, and I think guarded against some of each other's weaknesses. But I think what they really were looking for is we have no idea how to say no to your father. And we figure you're the oldest son. You must have learned how to tell him no growing up. Right. I mean, that's like, somehow or other, sons have to figure out how to deal with their dad. I think in almost every family, that's, and ours was no different.
Especially the oldest, right?
Well, I think I have, that's what I would have said. That's probably what I did say back then. But I think it's true. It's true for both of my other brothers too, and each of them was, very, very successful in doing that. The middle brother partnered with my dad after Dad retired from Humana to build what is still the largest public park to be completed in the United States so far in this century. And it was it's a long story, but they really worked closely together on that. And then the youngest one spent 27 years in the Marine Corps, was badly wounded in the first Gulf War, and just had a very different relationship with my dad. I mean, they both were, and my brother still is, a very strong leader. Very strong and opinionated leader, as was my dad.
There's the acorn in the oak, right?
I mean, can you imagine a Marine officer having strong opinions?
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, we have a good family with a lot of variety. But anyway, the point I was trying to make was like, when I came back to Louisville, I didn't know anything about healthcare other than that I'd been really interested. I mean, when my dad, he would he would tell me what was going on with work. I mean, he never wore a suit and tie ever. I never saw him until, occasionally he would show up at the breakfast table in a long sleeve shirt and a tie and a suit. And I said, what's going on? He said, oh, I'm going to meet with the bankers today. When you meet with your bankers, you got to dress up. You got to put your best foot forward. Stuff like that. So anyway, I had that background, but I came back and well, it was interesting. The company was in some ways in a mess. It was in a lot of creative turmoil that turned out to be very productive. But I never went to work for the company. I couldn't imagine working for my dad, but I joined him on the board. And the family at that point was the largest non-institutional shareholder. And, I mentioned I'd been to law school. I'm kind of a corporate governance nerd, but, I had a very strong belief that the company was big enough to be able to hire people who knew way more than I did about how to do the things that were needed to be done. But as a representative of the shareholders, that was a legitimate role for me to play because I could, I believed if I went to work on learning the business, I could learn enough to be a good representative of the shareholders. And I had the same interest in the shareholders. I wanted the stock price to, be at the highest sustainable level that it could be. So, all right, that was too long a ramble.
No, it was awesome.
Is there any of that that's interesting to you?
I love it. I loved every second of it. So, so the shareholders come to talk with you, and they meet with you, and they say
two members of the board of directors.
Yeah, two members. Sorry, I meant members of the board. I apologize. So the two members of the board come to meet with you, and they tell you, "We need you involved in this."
Well, they just said we encourage you to to think about it. Yeah.
Did you do the Singapore thing?
No, I didn't. So I mean, I learned more. I talked to my dad. I talked to board. I learned more about what was going on in the company, and most important, I talked to my wife. We had. So we have basically a newborn and a 3-year-old, a 2.5, 3-year-old at that point, less than 1 and 3. And, Singapore was very attractive for some reasons. The job was exciting. And, Singapore is a very orderly city. Back then it was a very orderly city. But, both my wife and I had she lived in Hong Kong when I lived in China. And in those days, those places neither one of them was particularly orderly, but they were really changing. You had a sense that you were in, you were working on something that was going to get better. And Singapore, we were nervous that we would be in kind of like the foreign executives ghetto where we were further away, and partly she was worried about all the moms being together and only being a mom there, that was not her experience theretofore. And there's a lot of change for new parents, right? That didn't have anything to do with where we were going to live. But that was our first time in that role. So we hadn't been new parents before, so we were still learning. But Louisville was attractive for a couple of reasons, partly because we talked a little bit about it. I mean, it's a real city. It's not the biggest city, but it's a real city. And it's also, Louisville's pretty down home. You can, you can get out in the community. If you're interested in an issue area, you can get involved. It's not like Washington or I guess Southern California, probably. Many of the civic areas will have, 20 or 100 people kind of crowding around the table, pushing from all different directions. Louisville's more the kind of place, if you're interested in something, why don't you get involved? Why don't you do it? There's not enough people, working on stuff. Anyway, and then the extended family was a huge attraction. And as my wife now reports, we decided at the end of 1992 to move here for 3 to 5 years. And here it is, almost Christmas of 2025.
The longest 3 to 5 years of your life.
We're still here. And a lot of that is because she found work that she loved very quickly. we did, I mean, we've built a good life here, and it was, I think, very good for our children, and the extended family was part of that. I think they got a good education here, and it was so there. Anyway, there's lots of different stuff. But I did, came back and I got involved with Humana. It didn't work there, so I needed a day job and started this venture capital firm. I can tell you about that if you're interested. But
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, so for the first year, I really immersed myself in learning about Humana.
Mhm.
At that time, Humana was primarily a hospital company.
Mhm.
80%, they had about 92, I think they had 92 hospitals, one in Switzerland and one in London, and the rest in the United States. And 80% of their revenue and like 115% of their profits came from the hospitals. They
Wow.
also had a small insurance division that they had started when the regulatory regime around hospitals shifted. I won't bore you with all that unless you really want ancient history there. But the health plan was very exciting.
Mhm.
It had, my dad believed a lot of potential. So, and the hospitals were pretty mature, but the two businesses were in conflict,
Yeah.
and they were bringing each other down. So the, my dad and his partner, before he died, they had agreed that they would separate the two into different businesses. And dad was staying with the insurance side. So I learned everything I could about health insurance. That was back in the days of the legislative fight over Hillary Care.
Yeah.
You're old enough to remember
Remember
Hillary.
that? Yep.
And, but I went around to all of the major markets, and, I was young, I'm in my 30s. I was just nakedly ignorant,
Mhm.
but I would go meet with the leaders in the market and the head of sales, and I would just say, teach me, tell me about stuff. And I'd follow them around for a while, go out on sales calls and all that. And, you know, I think um, they were all really generous with their time, but they were also smart enough to know, hey, this guy is going to have some influence here,
Yeah.
and he is authentically and truly ignorant.
Mhm.
And it's to everybody's advantage if we help him understand what's really going on.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful period. I mean, I met some great executives, and I mean, sort of, I to this day, if I can go visit a factory or any kind of a production unit, I love site visits.
Yeah.
You always learn a ton. But so I did that for a year, and then I joined the board, and of this new spinoff, this unprofitable, very tiny insurance company at that point. And practicing law was not interesting. I'd loved the legal work at the State Department,
Mhm.
but small market, I mean, the State Department work was just international excellence. I
Yeah.
mean, they have just great, great lawyers, still. Not that they're not great lawyers in Louisville, but the practice complexity was
Yeah.
lower, was what I found. So I had an old friend, who had, um, too long story. Anyway, he had the entrepreneurial bug, and he built a publishing company, which he was able to sell for 20 or $25 million or something like that. So he had capital.
Mhm.
He wasn't the only shareholder, so he didn't get all that money, but he had enough capital. I had access to some capital, and we started talking, and like, we should do something together.
Mhm.
We didn't know what we should do together. I thought, we said, well, maybe you should run my campaign for Congress. And then he said, maybe you should run my campaign for Congress. And they're like, well, what are your politics? And we found out we totally disagreed about politics. But um, anyway, and we explored, shall we start a business? Do we buy a business? But then we heard about this venture capital idea
Mhm.
where you tell everybody, I'm a venture capitalist. I'll help you raise money for your business. but then people come and tell you about their best business ideas. And we thought,
Mhm.
that's cool.
Yeah.
So, and, again, we're in Louisville, Kentucky, and back in the early 90s, there's really that whole infrastructure of how to finance startup businesses. There was the Small Business Administration guaranteed bank loans.
Mhm.
That was critical to the early days of Humana and thousands and thousands and thousands of other businesses. That's been
True. Yeah.
really, really important. So venture capital is the more modern thing people talk about, but it's
Mhm.
not the first entry in all of that. But so, we got started and we had the benefit of, some mentors, some, older people who actually knew what they were doing, and we were very, and we just said, can we follow you around and see what you do? And we invested in a couple of things that worked. And one of the things about venture capital is anytime you invest in something that is a huge success, everyone concludes that they're geniuses together and that they want to work together more. So we had some very good experience, and then across the 30 odd years, it's a cyclical industry. I've concentrated pretty heavily in healthcare, and there have been very good times and very bad times.
Mhm.
And but it really has scratched my itch for opportunities to learn more
Yeah.
about what's coming and also to work with people. And this, I'm going to go back to those crazy Puritans who I studied
Yeah.
in college, but I love working with people who believe that what they're doing is important
Mhm.
and can really have positive change. They're not all right.
Yeah.
And I don't, I mean, and most of them who I meet with don't, and we invest in over time, maybe it used to be 5 out of 100. Now, because of the ease of sharing business plans around, it's probably 5 out of 1,000 or something like that. But, the energy and just the commitment and the excitement of
Mhm.
people who are not, they're not sitting around complaining, they're trying to change something.
Yeah.
I've liked that very, very much about the work. The work is hard, nothing is super easy. Software is supposed to be magic, but you still have to sell it.
Mhm.
Um, so
True.
anyway, yeah. But so that's what and so I built this venture capital firm here. I've been engaged with Humana, and
Did you know there's an app that has no side effects that allows you to use sound waves to tell your brain what you want it to do? It's called newcalm.com and it's amazing. It literally uses sound waves. If you want to tell your brain to go to sleep, if you want to tell your brain to recover, if you want to tell your brain to put you in peak physical state, if you want to tell your brain to focus, if you want to tell your brain to take a power nap, you can do all of these things and more with newcalm.com. Go to newcalm.com today, promo code Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go there today.
you know, it's been interesting.
Yeah. Sounds like
Yeah,
it. Sounds like it.
yeah. I mean,
So your dad at some point decides he's going to write a book,
yeah,
and it's a memoir,
yep,
right? So he
exactly.
decides he's going to write a book, and he comes to you to edit it.
Nope.
Okay.
He decided to write a book, and he worked with another a journalist named Bob Hill,
Okay.
who sort of the co-writer or
Wrote the
his
forward. Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, wrote the forward. And Bob was and is Bob is a great storyteller, and
Yeah.
he was not a business journalist. He was I mean his when he retired from being a journalist, he runs a what do you call it? A like a tree and plant a nursery. He's got a nursery.
Okay.
He and his wife run a nursery together. He and his favorite thing is to write stories about people on their front porch or in their environment. He's a people storyteller.
Yeah.
But Bob, my dad got Bob to go out and interview 50 or 60 people who'd been along for the ride or were partners in different pieces of it. I was one of those. And then eventually the two of them put together a draft. Dad shared it with me, one of my brothers, three other people he was close to for feedback. And we all gave feedback of some kind or another. I didn't see anybody else's feedback. And then he took some of that, he did whatever he did. And then he got another draft, printed it out, and had it in his briefcase when he went to see a doctor because his back was hurting him.
Hmm.
And and that was like a 6 or 7 year process, what I just described of, the creation of the book and the writing of it. And, and he wasn't in a rush. But then it turned out, he was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which is a blood-borne cancer that usually manifests in the back or sometimes in the ribs. I think sometimes in the arms, but just out of the blue. And it was in his back. The back pain got significantly worse. And he had the book with him. He kept it with him. He always intended he was going to pick it up and, whip it into shape himself.
Mm-hmm.
But he wasn't able to. The progression of the disease and the other stuff, because my mom failed at the same time. They passed away 1 month apart, as you know from the book. But they so a couple months before he passed, he just he said, "Look, would you see that this book is published somehow?" He said, I didn't write it for fame and fortune, but I don't know if anybody will be interested, but at least for the family, see if you can get it whipped into shape and get it published. And so I said I would. And different of my siblings took, the good news is, if there is good news, with 5 siblings, we had a pretty big workforce to help my mom and my dad at the same time. And we sort of did different things. And I tried to help Dad navigate the complexity of the healthcare system, and then, took on the editing and the publication of the book after his death. So,
so I'm hesitant to ask you this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I'm just annoyingly curious. I'm annoyingly curious. And I think I apologized ahead of time for this, but isn't it, how do you feel about the fact that your dad literally helped build the healthcare system that we have today, and at the end of his life, you were helping him navigate it?
It's a good question. I guess, my general view of the world is that, there are many, there is evil in the world. There are people who intentionally do bad things. But many of the problems of today are the result. They reflect successes that happened yesterday, things that we achieved yesterday, but then, they have side effects. They have new issues. And, so the complexity of the healthcare system and the lack of coordination of care, which is what, I'm happy to talk more about this, but when we talked earlier, those were the things that made, for both my father and my mom, the sort of navigation of their final days harder than it needed to be, even with good insurance, even with good clinical care. And I have no complaints about the medical care that my dad received at all. And he had loving nursing care. And people were doing their very best, but the left hand and the right hand still often didn't know what each other were doing.
Right.
And the family member who, thought he was a knowledgeable healthcare person, but, when 4 or 5 different specialists are each prescribing 3 to 5 different pills and changing the prescriptions constantly, you know, and this is like, and I'm, you know, it was incredibly difficult. And the difficulty was partly, you know, really guilt inducing because it was like, you should know how to do this. You should be better at it. What I have since learned, I think, is this is such a common experience.
Yeah.
I mean, there's somebody in the family. If you ask, oh, your elderly parent or someone you love is in poor condition, you know, the subject of who is filling the pill box, and it comes up, and it's like, and I don't mean to pick only on that thing. It's just an example of, you know, of the complexity. So I I guess my overwhelming sentiment is just there's more work to do.
Yeah.
And plus, this stuff is wildly expensive
Mhm.
compared to, and let me get a little bit to the punchline because eventually with my dad, he was not able to stay at home. That was what he wanted. We tried, you know, but the complexity was overwhelming, including the sort of social complexity of having two frail elders together
Mhm.
with different care. It was like a two-person nursing home
Mhm.
some ways that we were trying to operate. But so he went into a rehab center, and the medical director there was a palliative care doctor. And this is where, you know, I remember the first meetings, but it's still emotional because it was like literally she stilled the waters. This just raging storm of confusion in the first 24 hours that she took charge of my dad's case. She just calmed it all down. I mean, okay, what are all these medications? Let's work them through. And you don't need this, and you don't need that, and this, and you know, I mean, she had the knowledge, the experience, and the authority to
Mhm.
do it. You know, my mom in particular was very concerned with the pain medications that my dad was being prescribed. The back pain was really, really, really severe. Um, but my mom was, and I was concerned too. I don't want to blame it on, but we were concerned that, you know, the sort of desire to quiet things down would turn him into a vegetable
Mhm.
by overprescribing. And his mind was sharp all the way to the end.
Yeah.
But mom was also concerned because there were grandkids in the house. I mean, lots
Mhm.
of grandkids and opioid epidemic. We don't want to have opioids lying around in the house.
Yeah.
So there's all this stuff, and she just, I still remember she was just a wonderful doctor, and she really emotionally smart because she got it right away that I was like really stretching to try to manage all this stuff. And I still remember when I told her about the we had this conversation about pain pills and all this, and she looks at me and she said, David, you know, I know you're really smart and accomplished, but you're kind of an idiot. She says, like, I I know that there's no way you could know, but let me explain. The dosage that your father is on, he's never taken a pain pill in his life. He's on a dosage because he's so opiate naive
Mhm.
that, you know, this would not addict a grasshopper or something like that.
Yeah.
The grasshopper is not exact words, but
Yeah.
you know, and it was like, and she's like, look, just you relax. I've
Mhm.
got this.
Yeah.
I really got this. And we will manage his pain, but we will not turn him into a vegetable. Don't you just check that off. And, you know, there were, you know, there were other, so there are two things about that. And this is where I'm sort of preaching about what have I learned as I focused my venture capital interests and also my civic and advocacy work
Mhm.
around who is really trying to make this end of life coordination challenge better.
Mhm.
You know, one thing is the palliative care doctors, and I didn't even know, you know, okay, I'm a healthcare nerd. I
Mhm.
don't actually know what palliative care is. I thought it was like part of hospice. You wave the white flag and say, I give up, you know, I'm going to die. Let's call a palliative care doctor. It's not that. I mean, they're basically primary care doctors for people who are, you know, have complicated diseases and are nearing the end of life. And they manage the entirety of the case with an eye toward the patient's goals.
Mhm.
And if the patient's goal is stay at home, if the patient's goal is, you know, I'm not interested in an extra 30 days where I'm unconscious and tethered to a bunch of machines. I mean, they manage all of that.
Mhm.
But that's really important, the knowledge and the authority to be the quarterback
Mhm.
in this period of life. But the other thing is the communication ability, and
Yeah.
not there's no specialty where every doctor is equally good or equally bad at
Mhm.
communicating. But oh my gosh, a good palliative care doctor has experience
Yeah.
in explaining, and I mean, you had the experience with with your grandfather. There are all these different symptoms, but somebody has to look at the whole picture
Yeah.
and say, what does it mean? And then, if there's family or some other caregiver, explain it to them and help them understand how they can do their job in a way that is, you know, and I think the maybe in my case, it was get back to being the son,
Mhm.
quit being the medical coordinator, and
Yeah.
and let the human relationships have a little more space
Mhm.
beside the clinical complexity and the medical relationships. And again, we're talking about somebody over 65
Mhm.
on Medicare, so that, I mean, if you're under 65 and don't have good insurance, there's a whole nother theme of who's
Yeah.
managing the bill paying that, is crippling for
Yeah.
so many Americans, either, I mean, financially, way too often, but there's also time commitment and a complexity about all that stuff. And so that was not my experience, because once you turn 65 in this country, you sort of effectively move to, you know, Germany or Canada or something. You're on a universal government paid plan. The government doesn't pay for everything, but it pays for the majority of stuff. So, anyway, bump me back toward something that is, that, any of that you want me to talk more about, or move on to
Well,
something?
so I'm gonna ask you something that's
Yeah.
probably, I probably shouldn't ask, but I'm gonna ask anyway.
Uh-oh.
So when you met her,
Yeah.
and how did you feel? Like when she started sort of going through all that, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that she called you an idiot, but right, just, I mean, think about this for a second. How strong did she have to be to feel that she could say to you, you're kind of an idiot about this, right?
Well, so first of all, I literally felt like the water said calm.
Yeah.
Like I was on a boat getting tossed around.
Like all this that
I
was on your
I
shoulders
couldn't
got
I couldn't
relieved, right?
I couldn't sleep. I felt like I was not, like I was just doing a horrible job
Yeah.
at this task. And I was just sort of at my wit's end. And, my parents, it was, you described this situation earlier. I mean, they really wanted to be together
Yeah.
all the way through. And they both, they worked very hard to
Mhm.
make that possible in their commitment to each other. But it just wasn't possible in the
Yeah.
end. And that was very, very hard,
Tough.
because, I mean, my mom was not happy when he moved out.
Yeah.
So, but I guess the main thing is I felt like, I have an ally, and I have, almost and in some ways it was like I have like there's a doctor in charge
Yeah.
finally. And that's really unfair, because the cancer doctor, they did a great job on the cancer.
Mhm.
The cardiologist did a great job on the heart. The nephrologist did a great job on the kidneys. Everybody did a great job in their own lane. But the problem is for the patient and for the caregiver, there's too much schlepping around.
Yeah.
And, well, I'll come back to this. Um, but the palliative care doctor, and there are other great examples. Sometimes people in different parts of the country, there's integrated primary care that sort of manages all the other relations. Southern California is actually one of the places where and Kaiser is allegedly really good at this, within their systems. And so, I mean, I don't actually know Southern California other than by reputation, but
Yeah.
anyway, I felt great. And I also, and I'm, like she was joking, but the idiot comment, but it was like, she really was perceptive. I mean, she read me right. She knew this guy, he he really does. He knows a ton about what's going on, and he's there, he shows up, and so, but it's like she had to cool me down. Not that I wasn't angry with her, but she had to just like get me to back away a little bit and the, you know, let the system, because now there was a system,
Mhm.
do its task, do its job.
Well, you were a little
And
worked up, and you were worked up
well,
because
I
you were
was a
trying to
kid.
do the best you could for your family, and
That's
yet you
right.
were up
Yeah,
against this morass of a system that doesn't make
yeah,
any sense, right? And it's like
yeah,
every time you turn around, it's something else, and then you're trying to figure out what drugs don't interact with other drugs, and what things should you
yeah.
not take and be taking, and I don't know if you know who Gary Brecka is, but Gary Brecka used to work in the life insurance business. And what
Yep.
he did was they would send him an applicant's, somebody would apply for life insurance. They would send him their blood work, and he would tell them
Yeah,
within a month when they were going to die.
yeah.
But it
Wow.
was illegal.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
a
yeah, yeah, yeah,
felony
yeah,
for him to
yeah,
go back to that person that was killing themselves with those drug
yeah,
interactions
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
tell them that they're killing themselves.
Yikes. Well, this was um so you know I didn't try to have that much. I didn't think I had that much knowledge. I wasn't
Yeah.
second guessing on the medical stuff.
No.
So I guess again, there's I guess it's my experience and my belief is there's a lot of variation in individual cases
Yeah.
and clinical care, but the commonality is when things get complicated.
Hmm.
So I think like the way my situation is like a whole lot of other people's is
Hmm.
I was a first timer. This
Yeah.
was my first time.
Yeah.
Um, and the system, it was not anybody else's first time there.
Yeah.
And I would also say for the faith leaders and even the social workers who are kind of in this world a lot, it's very hard to talk between no matter how well educated or what other skills you bring to this, if you're a first timer interacting with this, you're going to have a hard time understanding what's
Hmm.
going on. And it's not like, oh, there's a 5-day surgery. This is going to go on for months or sometimes, years. Um, I often, think, gosh, if I had it to do over again, I would do better. And I think I mean, my father-in-law is 99 and a half now, and he's still going strong. And I mean, he's, when you're talking about your grandfather, I thought of my father-in-law because he's just still, he's still really with it. But, um, and when he has had issues, I have there are a couple things I've learned that I make sure are included in the conversations with the doctors so that they understand, this is not a guy who's about to topple over. This is a guy who still reads at church once a month, and puts down his cane and climbs. It's an Episcopal church where they have those little, I can't remember what they're called, but like the elevated pulpit where you have to
Hmm.
climb up to.
Hmm.
Anyway, but um, well, again, I think um, the other thing that happened with the palliative, so she was great at communicating, but she also really reduced the amount of referring out, of
Yeah.
running around to other specialists, because
Hmm.
she pared back a lot of things that were not, they were not medically necessary
Hmm.
in the context of how long he was likely to live.
Right.
Um, and she also was really good at communicating with the family about those realities. And there
Hmm.
was a lot of uncertainty because, multiple, and it's also, you know, if it had happened 5 years later,
Hmm.
like today,
Yeah.
the prognosis would be really different because
Yeah.
there are just great cancer care drugs that are coming on. And we're also learning how to use some that have been around in different ways, because the analytical firepower that is being brought to bear on the healthcare system is, stronger every day. So anyway, that search for a quarterback, and I think also, the other thing, and I hope um, some of this is useful to your listeners, because the other thing I felt myself, and I've learned in talking to just an awful lot of other people about these topics, is most caregivers they feel pretty lonely as they go through this. The family caregivers. Many of them don't think of themselves. I didn't know that I should think of myself as a caregiver. I thought, I'm the son. This is just what you do.
I'm taking care of them. It's
Yeah,
what
and
it's,
so
yeah.
this is a part of life. This is
Yeah.
a stage. And this is, but and for so many people, socially, people worry, and maybe it's true that this is a downer, that they don't want to bring it into all of their social relations. For a lot of people, if they're worried about their hours getting cut back, or if you're in a time when job security is low, or a place where job security is low, people fear bringing their problems at home, and this is a problem at home,
Yeah.
into the workspace. And
people suffer in silence, David.
People suffer in silence. And that's, again, my focus here is it's not on the clinical magic, because we got a lot of clinical magic. It's about the human, interface here. And one of the other things we can do for each other is, if we know somebody is going through this, part of it is just, I see you, I respect what you're doing. You're doing something good.
The loneliness
So yeah,
is just enormous, and
it's just enormous.
and it's so hard to quantify. It's so difficult to share with people how lost you feel when you're trying to do what you can to help your parents in the last stages of their lives.
Right.
And it's difficult enough to watch them go through what they're going through. It's something entirely different to be going through it with them. Right. And dealing with a system that's just, it's unbelievable. That complicates things. And I love the fact that you're as passionate as you are about making some changes and helping to improve this. I don't think there's anybody on the planet that's better qualified than you are to actually sort of spearhead this thing and make this happen. So I absolutely, I have so much more respect for you now. It's, you know what I mean? And I'm really, really glad you went through this. I do hope you write a book about this, because I do feel like what you're saying, and I'm incredibly excited to get this out to the world, what you're saying and what you've been through and what you've learned is going to help people. And one of the things that I want people to think about is, if you're a caregiver and you feel like you're on this planet by yourself, and a lot of people do, go find other people that are caregivers and talk, right? Just unload.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do.
People think that when they go through this kind of thing, that nobody else wants to hear about it. Nobody else wants to be burdened with it. You don't want to be a burden to other people, just like you were talking about.
No, that's exactly
your parents
right.
didn't want to be a burden.
You said it better
right?
than I did. That's exactly it. Yeah.
People think that that's going on, but what's really going on is people want to hear what's happening with you, right? They want to hear what the latest update is. And you can help other people without even knowing that you're doing it. Because I promise you this, there are people that are watching you and they're listening to you, okay? And you don't even know it. And you're having an impact on them and you don't know it. And that's the thing that I think is the most powerful with you, is your story and the emotion that you felt going through this, right? That raw honesty is rare. You know what I mean? And it's something that people seek. They want that. And there's a big, very large generation called the boomers that are going through this sort of getting older phase, right? My parents are in that boat. And my sister, bless her heart, has been advocating for my dad for a number of years. My dad has had back surgery, shoulder surgery, all this stuff. My mother had hip surgery,
Yeah.
and without an advocate in this system, this, it's really hard.
Really hard.
And things just don't get done. And, she asks questions like nobody's ever seen.
Yeah.
And these people respond to it.
Yeah.
They respond to this.
Yeah.
And, but they don't just volunteer it. You have to ask. You have to ask. It's why I'm writing a book on the power of questions, because there's big time power in asking. It's that simple. So if it's okay, I'd like to pivot to the book real quick, if that's all right.
Okay, let me say one more thing about this topic.
Absolutely.
Because I want to end on a note of hope, because the way I work in this, it's partly venture capital, it's partly curiosity. But when I came back from a couple months of just like mourning my parents and catching up on sleep and everything, and decided, okay, I want to learn, what this is a mess. Who's working on this problem?
Yeah.
And I just started reaching out, using my Rolodex, calling anybody I knew who might talk to me and saying, hey, this was my experience. Do you know anybody who's working on this? Well, I've had this experience so many times in the venture capital work and innovation work. Once you see a problem, you can be sure that there are already thousands of people working on it. Yeah. There are 4 trade journals, there are advocacy organizations in Washington. And sure enough, there are some fantastic people who have dedicated their lives to working on this problem. The movement to get the hospice benefit paid for within Medicare, I mean, that happened maybe 40 years ago, but there was a whole generation of activists around this constellation, and those kind of organizations. And there, anyway, my point is, this is not a lonely insight only from me. I mean, my experience of loneliness was quite real. And it's definitely one that needs to be elevated, but there are just really wonderful people. For the caregivers, who are listening, who are going through this right now, there's an organization called Archangels, a nonprofit in Massachusetts that it's Archangels, and they've got a website with all kinds of, basically, you are not alone information about, and they're not preaching you're not alone. They're like, it's data nerdy, but it's also like, this is the percentage of the population, and it's like half of us are going through this. So anyway, there's a lot of good stuff happening, but yes, we can pivot to the book.
So real quick, you just made me think of this. So when I was in the intensive care unit a couple of months ago, a nurse came in that took care of me. And I got there, and word got out in the hospital, and it apparently went really fast, that I had a podcast. And so people from the hospital were coming in my room, in my ICU room, and they were sharing with me their life story. I even had some nurses come in and ask me parenting advice. Not joking. This literally happened. And I'm all hooked up and laying there in bed. And I was happy to help. You know what I mean? It was kind of cool. It was a nice distraction from, when am I getting out of here kind of thing. But this one in particular came in, and without, I didn't really ask, but he told me, 19 years prior, he and his wife had a baby at that hospital, and she developed a hemorrhage that almost killed her. And he was in the painting business at the time. He sold his painting company, went back to school, got his nursing degree, and was now a full-time nurse at the same hospital that saved his wife's life. And he and his wife have a nonprofit that she literally jumps in and helps when a woman has a baby and has a similar hemorrhage. Apparently it's a thing that happens. So that morning she was literally working with a mom in Maryland from San Diego. She was working with a mom in Maryland and rallying resources around her to help her get through all this. That's the kind of thing that I want people to understand. I want people to understand that there are people out there who have been through this before, much like you, that really want to help. They really are there to help and to guide and to lift up and to listen, right? Sometimes it's just hearing them out.
Mhm.
Let them get it off their chest, right? So
Well, yeah.
yeah, just amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay. So we're going to talk about your dad's book. I love the fact that you worked with him and edited this and made this happen. This had to have felt amazing when you got this done. This book is about somebody who is pretty amazing and had was quite a character and quite honestly didn't really take no for an answer, like you said, right? I mean, this whole book is about, we did this and we just went to work, right? So the first part of the book is the early years. Can you talk about that part for a second?
Well, I think the summary is, um, my dad was born in 1931.
Yeah.
So right as the Depression was really, really, really underway. His dad, both his parents were first generation in the city, in from the countryside, not very far from the city. But his dad was a laborer, or just he could fix anything, he could do anything with his hands, but he was a general laborer, and he didn't work in the Depression steadily at all until World War II. Production picked up when he got on with a military contractor in like 1940. So, and my dad's mom was she was a very, very smart woman, an Irish, kind of, her mom had come from Ireland. And so she came over on the boat, Jessie America O'Brien, born on the boat. So, and my grandmother, by the time I knew her, she was the matriarch. She was in charge. She was tough as nails. She had 6 kids. My dad was number 2. And, Dad always said everybody in the neighborhood was poor, so nobody knew they were poor. We just had, we did what we needed to do, to get by. But, that was where he grew up. And he was smart, partly because his mom made them all go to school every day. There was no question about that. And they had to go to church on Wednesday night and Sunday, and they had to go to the library and check out books. Anyway, there were a whole bunch of, family disciplines that worked on him. But he did well in high school. He got a Navy ROTC scholarship to go to the University of Louisville, which is where he met my mom, who was a great student. He was a couple years older. She was the sort of freshman woman of the year. And so it was and I think I may have said earlier, but her dad was a pharmacist. Her mom was a teacher. So they didn't miss paychecks during the Depression. My dad's family barely had paychecks. Eventually his mom got on with the Census Bureau as a clerk. And that's, so, but it was great marriage. After college, Dad did 3 years in the Navy. And this is a good place to cap the early years, because it was, kind of a good grounding and a lot of motivation. But he always credited the Navy with teaching him how to be a leader. And the image, I think he tells the story very well in the book, but he also, I'd heard it a lot. He spent time every summer when he was in college. They'd go off on they'd sail in the summer, the Navy ROTC guys. So he was down in somewhere in the Caribbean or off the Atlantic coast when a hurricane came through, and they got out of the way as much as they could, but they were, bordering on it, huge waves and all those, kind of terrifying images of the tiny little ship. And it was like a destroyer escort or something, not a huge ship, being tossed around. And, he would talk about the captain on the bridge. And, the captain is making decisions, every 20 seconds. And every single one of them, the life of everybody on the ship it all depends on going straight into the waves and, keeping the rights. Anyway, they're all, they're highly functional kind of decisions where you get very fast feedback. But, what my dad took away from that was, it was a new situation. Captain had never been in that situation before. But, the leader has to make the decisions. You have to decide. And the imperative of action, as opposed to taking too long, or I don't know. I mean, 50% could be this way, could on the one hand, on the other is takes the ship down.
Yeah.
And and he carried that forward. The one thing he and his partner agreed on, and he described kind of the core of their partnership was, whatever came up that had to be dealt with, if one of them was away, if one of them was unreachable, the other could decide. And they had this bias for making decisions. And he, one of his core beliefs as the organization got bigger was that the people at the top can really screw things up by not by letting things fester, basically. That, and the farther away people are from what's going on at the top, the more prepared they are to believe that it's either idiocy or chicanery. Often. I mean, I think Dilbert got a lot of things right about big organizations. So, but the Navy stuff was really powerful. It was also, a time of, both my parents grew up in Louisville, going down to, to Norfolk, Virginia, and then down, to down in Florida when he was actually serving there. I mean, these were big steps for my mom also. Right out when they were married, it was when she graduated and he was in the Navy. It was a joyful time for both of them, but also really influenced his leadership style.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. So getting down to business is the second part.
Yeah.
Talk about that for a second.
Well, the way they decided to build a nursing home is interesting. I'll summarize it as, a guy dad knew in high school, a couple years older, but they were in the same high school. Dad, as the junior lawyer in a small firm in Louisville, was dispatched to help with the closing of this guy buying the house of big deal executive who was moving out of town, one of the most expensive houses in town. And Dad did the paperwork and all the things that lawyers do at closings. And afterward, he asked the guy, he said, "Hey, I knew you at Male High School. I mean, you're like me. Your family didn't have two nickels to rub together. How can you buy this house?" That guy said, "Oh, Dave, I built a nursing home. You got to build a nursing home." And so my dad runs back to the office where his even more junior lawyer, this guy, Wendell Cherry, they're the bottom of the totem pole guys. He's like, Wendell, we got to build a nursing home. And that was the beginning. And they had this experience that we've already talked about of some exposure to how bad the current system was. And they knew a lot about how to finance real estate because they'd worked on a lot of, as lawyers. My dad was an accountant also. He was kind of a shoebox accountant through college. That was one of the ways he put himself through college and law school, was managing the books for small businesses and stuff. So anyway, the launch of the company was anything but a deeply considered market study, and and they had no notion that it would become a bigger enterprise. But the milestones along the way were I think one of them was they learned how to hire the right kind of person to manage the nursing home, often a nurse, but somebody who was really a stickler for the patient care and also the administration. I mean, you got to have, it's not just you got to have somebody walking up and down the halls and doing the right thing in each patient's room. You also have food, and you have to have the, I mean, it's not the most complicated business in the world,
Yeah.
but when you have frail elderly people, you have to do it right.
Yeah.
So they learned how to do the business. And then there was a kind of a bubble of nursing home construction. They started in 1961. Medicare and Medicaid were not passed until 64, 65
Hmm.
in that period. So a lot of people look back and say, oh, they started a nursing home company because of Medicare. Well, Medicare still doesn't pay for nursing homes, and Medicaid didn't exist then.
Right.
So that was not the origin of the idea, but there was a big bubble, and they went public in 1968. So 7 years later,
Mm-hmm.
they were able to go public. At that point, they had, I think, 8 nursing homes,
Mm-hmm.
and there was this huge bubble. Their stock went public at $8 a share. It raced up within a year to like $88 a share.
Ooh, wow.
And then the bubble burst and it
Mm-hmm.
fell back to $4 a share.
Wow.
So it reminds me of the, like Internet 1.0
Mm-hmm.
or other bubbles that we've been through.
Yeah.
But, my dad and his partner they were risk takers in really important ways, but they were very conservative about balance sheet
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And they, when stock price was high, they sold shares to strengthen their balance. They didn't just go borrow lots and lots of money, which they could, but they got as much cash as they prudently could get. And then when all of the industry went into the tank at once, they were able to acquire other nursing homes and other nursing home companies. And, when the dust settled from all of that, there were like 3 or 4 nursing homes of scale. And it was then called Extendicare. The company that became Humana was one of those. And they had, a really conservative balance sheet. But the stock price, the Wall Street recession in the early 70s, I mean, that's, but when I look at that, I mean, it's like, you could buy Humana shares for like, 2 times cash flow
Yeah.
for a long time. And I mean, this is like, if you had cash, which nobody did. Anyway, so that was another big thing. They learned along the way that the skills of running nursing homes were very similar to what it would take to run a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So they started building hospitals. They learned how to do that. Then they sold all the nursing homes and put the money into building more hospitals. And, that was a, great era. It's easy to forget today when we talk about, oh, America has too many hospitals, or we have, I mean, and that is arguably true compared to the rest of the world. But in the 60s and 70s, we did not have too many hospitals.
Right.
We had really old hospitals that were, kind of past there. I mean, and also a whole lot of new things could be done in hospitals. And Americans were living in different places. The whole suburbanization the move to South and West, that, things that have continued. There was a lot. So, putting hospitals where they were convenient to people or where people could use them was a good thing to do. Okay. So they did, they built the hospitals. Sorry, just 1 second. I think I may be getting the hook for my next meeting. Yikes. I am, but we can go on for a little longer if you have the patience. But yeah,
I absolutely do.
Yeah, so I guess the 2 things happened. The need for new hospitals was satisfied. I mean, this country, one of the things we really do well, once we figure out something, but there's a market for something, we know how to go. We got entrepreneurs who will go learn how to do it. We've got a financial system that will bring capital to it. And we can do it pretty fast. Often we swing too far, we create too much, or, we're not perfect, but, part of the magic of the way our economy works is that when there's a need, we can learn really fast and we can finance things well. So the hospital business got mature. There was regulatory change about how to pay for things. Healthcare costs were starting to get out of control. And that led to them getting into the insurance business. The initial thought was we have, hospitals are only half occupied. We could sell really cheap insurance if it used only those hospital beds.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the theory of, getting in there. Took a long time to learn the insurance business. They didn't really have to put any capital into buying anything. But turns out if you set the price too low, you can lose a lot of money really fast if medical costs are higher than your premiums. But eventually they learned the business. And I sort of came in maybe at the end of the first quarter in the beginning to learn that business. And that's where I got involved. And
Yeah, that's cool.
That story.
So part 3, attention and engagement, River City.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so oh man, they're just so my dad was very involved civically.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up here. He believed very strongly that, and he would say anything you can do anywhere in the world, you can do here.
Mm-hmm.
You may have to create it yourself, but you can do it. He also had been exposed early on. He was a boxer. He and his older brother were boxers growing up. They had known and been trained a little bit by the trainer who trained Cassius Clay, but before he was Muhammad Ali.
Right.
And as young lawyers, there was sort of a syndicate of Louisville, kind of bankers and lawyers, and it was more of a protective syndicate. Boxing was really corrupt in those days, and Ali was a shocking talent from a very, very early age. And these guys sort of they were his manager, at least contract manager, for a few years to protect him from the mob that would make him take a dive or so that management of his early career to prevent him from getting ruined before he could. And so anyway, and these two young lawyers, my dad and his partner, they did some of the scut work around that. So the point I'm making was the story of Ali, this incredible Louisvillian who, from a social perspective, was also a real glass breaker.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Ali, when Ali didn't have no quarrel against those Vietnamese, wasn't going to go fight in the war, was a conscientious objector and was stripped of his title. That was, I mean, both my parents thought that's nonsense. I mean, this guy is, he has convictions, and taking his title away is not in any event related. Anyway, but the idea of you can be from, and Ali grew up like 4 blocks away from where my dad's house was. He's younger, and the segregation that came to characterize that neighborhood had not happened when my dad was in it. It was sort of block by block variation. Anyway, but that story, and then Humana. So Humana's rising. The hospitals were a more stable business. There's dividend stream. All of a sudden, my dad has some money, and he's able to make charitable gifts. And he just got involved with a bunch of stuff. And he also, the company needed to recruit talent. And so like building, my dad was not a opera fan, he didn't know anything about, he was not a classical musician. He and his mom were both famous in the Baptist church for not being able to carry a tune in a bucket, but nonetheless making very, very, very joyful, loud noise when it came time to sing. But anyway, he got engaged in, building an arts center. He got engaged in bringing sports events to town and building up the university. And the company, 2 things related to the business. One was, there's a great story in there. They recruited the leading heart surgeon in artificial heart, in the creation and transplant of artificial hearts, which was a big hope, as heart disease was really rising, that there would be a way to get the shortage of hearts, which basically come from motorcycle accidents,
Right.
to be met with, an artificial heart. That ended up not working, but the second and third transplants were in a Humana hospital in Louisville, and the whole medical press corps, hundreds of reporters, descended on Humana and this hospital to report the story. It was a shockingly big deal. I wasn't living in town, so I didn't have any firsthand experience about that. I just read and heard about it. But that was a big deal. That put the company's name kind of on the map beyond being a, hospital builder and manager. And then the company built a headquarters building, which was, they had an architectural competition. A guy named Michael Graves won and designed a very interesting, building. And, that got a lot of attention. And, then as now, there was a lot of controversy about the cost of healthcare, the role of for-profit, or as my dad and increasingly I say, tax-paying hospitals in that. So there was a fair amount of controversy, and my dad was, he had a lot of conviction in what he was doing, and he was also quite pugnacious. And I don't think I would not say my dad had a chip on his shoulder, but he did not like being preached to by old money about, the path to virtue.
I can you can see that in the book.
Yeah, no, it comes across.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome. And I fell in love with your dad. Absolutely fell in love with your dad reading this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So part 4 is retirement, rescue, and reinvention.
Well, so he first retired from the company in the late 90s, and there are two things. First of all, I can't blame that him. We, and I include the whole board, we chose a successor who was not quite ready for the job. And I think, but I also don't want to say it's only about one individual. It took a long time to learn the insurance business, and the insurance company had been independent of the hospitals for only about 5 or 6 years at the time of that first succession. And it's also fair that the peer companies were going through. I mean, there were a lot of new insurance companies. Managed care was kind of a new thing, and just there was a lot of innovation. There was a lot of information technology being applied to some of the same challenges that we're still working on. How do you get things to be more efficient, be able to manage things with better data? And, those companies all went through periods of just basically underestimating what their medical costs were going to be.
Yeah.
It's a weird business because you have to price your product long before you know what the actual cost of what you're selling today are, and you have to report your earnings before you know what either your cost or your revenue are going to be. I mean, it's all these actuarial expectations, and actuarial sciences. I have enormous respect for it, but it is incredibly complicated. And so anyway, the company sort of blew up after he retired the first time. Then the CEO retired. Dad came back and ran it with a sort of office of the CEO structure, out of which one of the guys who was in there became the CEO to follow him, a guy who had been a spectacular hospital CEO and had moved over to running regions of the insurance company, and also just had, I mean, a great, he was the kind of leader who was really great at getting people who really knew stuff to sort of get to the point and focus on the main thing
Mm-hmm.
rather than, chasing all the rabbits at once and not catching any of them.
Yeah.
So anyway, and then so the first attempt at retirement led to him coming back for a little while. And that was he was in the CEO chair from maybe 99 to the end of 2000. He stayed chair until 2005. And the company he always way back in 61 when they started, he put a 73-year-old mandatory retirement age from the board. And the basic idea was you got to have some way to get rid of people
Mm-hmm.
at some point, and there's no magic, but that was like, and so there was a lot of like, oh, why don't you change? Let's change that. You can stay longer. He's like, nope, and it was very clear for a long time. That's my plan. People say, what do you think? Are you going to retire? I say, yeah, we have a mandatory retirement age. I'll retire. So anyway, that's what he did. And that was '05. He passed in 2019. And the main thing he spent time on, I mean, he and my mom traveled a lot. They had 11 grandchildren. They were really engaged civically. They had super friends going way back to, at least middle school and Navy and law school, all these other parts of their lives. And they stayed in touch really well. But he and my brother started working on this park idea. And, my brother had the idea there, and like a lot of American cities, Louisville was kind of sprawling outward.
Mm-hmm.
And the history of America's great parks, Central Park probably being the easiest to point to in New York City, is the land was acquired before the city got to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the land in Central Park was just a big meadow and parts of it were a swamp and all this stuff. But somehow people had the idea of like, let's set this aside and not develop it.
Yeah.
And Frederick Law Olmsted, the landscape architect who designed that park, had built, his architecture firm had built parks all over the country, including 3 great parks in Louisville that they're like the Alaska Purchase or the Louisiana Purchase, right? It's like, who the hell, what, this is all empty land. We paid too much.
Mm-hmm.
But then before you know it, the population increases. But so my brother and my dad together, they acquired, they raised the money. My family contributed a lot, but raised a lot of money from other people and different governments. But they acquired 4,000 acres, either through purchase from, these farms, in some cases donations from the people who are the neighbors of the parks, who very generously and I think wisely believed in, the vision. Some of them gave easements over their land, but all of it was along this beautiful creek that was very unspoiled, and called Floyd's Fork. It eventually flows into the Ohio River, but just a lovely, lovely, lovely area. And so they got 4,000 acres, no eminent domain, no government involvement. It was all private, plan, design, fundraising. And then they built out a beautiful park that, I think their goal was by 2025 to maybe have, 1.5 million people a year visiting. It's like 4 million a year. People from all over Louisville go to it. And, it had been, outside the outer edge of development. Now, just as you'd expect, development has jumped over it, and there are great neighborhoods emerging on both sides. And, I don't know what, 50 or 100 years from now, that was their question that got it all started. My brother asked, the person who was running the existing parks department, he's like, is there anything we could do today that would really have a big impact 100 years from now? And her answer was something like, no, we're too landlocked. We can't do anything. I mean, the 100 years of the, and because she's thinking of the existing parks.
Mhm.
He's like, oh, we're not actually landlocked,
Mhm.
right? It just depends, because like cities grow and change. But my dad he loved that, and he, every day he always wore Parkland's branded short sleeve, shirt, kind of golf shirt. And he loved taking people out there and going around, and he was very proud of that. And the partnership with my middle brother was just great. And he was, both my parents were, they were, I think, wonderful grandchildren. They got to know each one of their grandchildren. Their grandchildren each is an individual. They're very different. They're, and they've gone on interesting paths too. So I don't know. That's like when he really retired, basically he immediately started something new.
Yeah.
He didn't, I mean,
Well,
he didn't want to be retired. I mean,
yeah.
he was going to the office every day until he went to see the doc because his back hurt. Not Saturday, but 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And because he had stuff he loved to work on.
Yeah. That was exactly it. He was always in motion, right?
Yeah,
And he was
in motion.
he was
That's
always
right.
going towards the
Yeah,
goal,
Yeah, that's sort of why Always Moving Forward
Mhm.
is the name of the book.
Yeah.
And I will say, you get the book on Amazon, you can get it hard copy, you can get it Kindle, or you can get get an
It
audio
looks like.
if you like to listen. Or here comes the Kentucky guy making the dig at Southern California, just in case you're stuck in traffic.
Right. Right. We spend our life in traffic, right?
Well, if you like audiobooks while you're stuck in traffic, here's a good one.
By the way, I interviewed a guy from Atlanta the other day, and they do the same thing. They spend a lot of time in traffic too. So
Yeah, and
it's not just a
sure.
Southern California thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure they don't spend even more. But
It's possible. It's
yeah,
possible.
yeah.
David Jones, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. This has been amazing.
Hey,
Absolutely epic.
Mike, I really enjoyed it. Yeah. Thanks for talking to me, and thanks for sharing also about yourself. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Appreciate you, bud. Can I ask you a question? Did you know that there's a technology that uses sound waves that'll tell your brain what to do? There literally is. It's called newcalm.com. It can tell your brain to heal, tell your brain to sleep, tell your brain to do all kinds of things. It can get you fired up. It can be a pre-workout. Newcalm.com. And the promo code is Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at the Mike Litton Experience.